Artemis is often remembered as the goddess of the hunt, a solitary figure moving through moonlit forests, bow in hand, beyond the walls of civilization. But the ancient imagination did not simply place her in the wilderness because she was free. It placed her there because the wilderness belonged to her. In the stories told about Artemis, mountains, groves, animals, young lives, and private spaces were not empty landscapes waiting to be explored. They were protected territories. And those who entered them without understanding their limits could discover that the goddess of freedom was also a goddess of consequence. The myth of Artemis begins not with a forest without rules, but with a boundary hidden among the trees. Why did the Greeks imagine the goddess who protected freedom in the wild as a figure whose boundaries could never be crossed without consequence? To answer that, we have to move beyond the familiar picture of Artemis as a huntress beneath the moon. Because in early poetry, in sanctuary worship, and in the stories that later made her unforgettable, Artemis protected something deeper than the chase. She protected what could not simply be claimed. The familiar Artemis is easy to recognize. She is the daughter of Zeus and Leto, the sister of Apollo, the virgin archer of Greek mythology. She moves through forests and mountains, accompanied by animals and attendants, distant from marriage and resistant to the powers of desire. In later traditions, she also becomes strongly associated with moonlight, often blending in the cultural imagination with lunar figures such as Selene. This is the Artemis preserved in sculpture, painting, poetry, and popular storytelling, independent, beautiful, untamed, and armed. But that image can be misleading if it makes her seem merely separate from human society. Ancient tradition presents something more complicated. Artemis did not simply abandon the ordered world for the wild. She guarded the places where the ordered world met what it could not fully control. One of the earliest surviving poetic portraits of Artemis appears in the Homeric hymn to Artemis. There, she ranges across shadowed hills and windy peaks with her bow. Yet after the hunt, she travels to Delphi, where she leads the dancing of the Muses and the Graces. The movement matters. The same goddess who travels through the mountains also enters a sacred center of music, ceremony, and order. She is not portrayed as chaos beyond civilization. She belongs to a world where wild nature and sacred order can exist together. Another early hymn makes the point even clearer. In the Homeric hymn to Aphrodite, Artemis is described as resisting Aphrodite's domain of desire. But the hymn does not say she loves only the hunt. It also associates her with music, dancing, shaded groves, and the city of just people. That is the first clue. The oldest literary Artemis is not simply a woman escaping society into the forest. She stands between different worlds, mountain and city, untamed animal and ritual dance, independence and communal order. The freedom she embodies is not disorder. It is a form of life protected by limits. And this is where the story becomes deeper than a portrait of a huntress. Because the boundaries Artemis guarded were not only found in landscapes, they were also found in human life. Across the Greek world, Artemis was worshipped in forms that extended far beyond hunting. Modern classical scholarship describes her as connected not only with wild nature, but with children, the transition into adulthood, childbirth, and the rearing of the young. At Broran in Attica, Artemis was honored as a protector of pregnant women who had recently given birth, and children. The Acropolis Museum records that women dedicated garments to Artemis in connection with successful childbirth. These were not images of a distant forest goddess who had nothing to do with human vulnerability. They were offerings to a figure invoked at moments when a life was crossing from one state into another. Childhood becoming adulthood. Pregnancy becoming birth. Safety meeting uncertainty. Even the locations of some Artemis sanctuaries matter. Scholarship has noted her association with mountains, marshes, border regions, and landscapes at the edge of settled space. Research on Artemis Limnatis at ancient Messene similarly connects her worship with sanctuaries outside urban centers, near natural water sources and territorial boundaries. This does not prove that every community worshipped Artemis in precisely the same way. Greek religion was never that uniform. But it does suggest a repeated pattern. Artemis appears wherever a boundary matters, between city and wilderness, youth and adulthood, protection and exposure, the familiar and the unknown. Her wild realm was not empty. It was sacred because it marked the point where human control began to fail. And no myth made that uncertainty more memorable than the story of Actaeon. Actaeon is remembered as a hunter who encounters Artemis in the wilderness and suffers a devastating reversal. He is transformed into the very kind of creature he once pursued, then no longer recognized by the hunting world he believed he understood. But the reason for Artemis's anger was not preserved in one single simple version. Greek traditions explained Actaeon's offense in different ways. Some connected it with arrogance or an improper claim. Others linked it with a forbidden sight. The surviving evidence is fragmentary, and scholars have cautioned against imagining a perfectly neat development from one fixed original story into another. That uncertainty matters, because the version most familiar today owes enormous influence to the Roman poet Ovid. In Book 3 of the Metamorphoses, Actaeon accidentally comes upon Diana, the Roman counterpart of Artemis, while she is bathing in a hidden grove. Ovid emphasizes that his error is not deliberate wrongdoing. The encounter is accidental. Yet the boundary has still been crossed, and nothing can restore the distance that existed before he entered. Ovid's telling is powerful because it turns Artemis's sacred world into an intensely private one. The wild grove becomes more than a hunting ground. It becomes a protected interior space, a place that cannot be entered simply because a traveler happens to find it. But Ovid was not writing the earliest Greek version of Artemis. He was shaping, in Roman poetry, a later and extraordinarily memorable expression of a much older mythic tension. Earlier material gives us a mountain-ranging archer, a leader of dance, a figure connected with groves, just communities, young people, and childbirth. Later literary memory places unforgettable emphasis on the forbidden encounter. The story did not remain still. And as it changed, Artemis increasingly became remembered not only as the figure of the wild, but as the figure who made its limits impossible to ignore. Yet the most revealing detail is not that Actaeon enters the forest. It is that he already thinks he belongs there. Actaeon is not a stranger stumbling into a world he cannot understand. He is a hunter. The forest is his skill, his confidence, his identity. He knows how to track movement, how to follow signs, how to pursue what appears before him. In almost any ordinary story, that familiarity would make him at home in Artemis's landscape. But this is precisely where the myth turns. Actaeon may understand the wilderness as territory to be crossed, searched, and mastered. Artemis represents a different meaning of the wild, a world that can be inhabited without being possessed. That is the central contradiction. The hunter is closest to her domain, yet he may also be the person most likely to misunderstand it. His knowledge of the forest does not grant him access to everything within it. His ability to pursue does not give him the right to see, claim, or enter without limit. In Ovid's later telling, the tragedy is sharpened by accident. Actaeon does not begin as a calculated intruder. Yet the story still insists that a boundary can matter even when it was not crossed with deliberate cruelty. That is an uncomfortable idea, and it is what makes Artemis more complex than a simply angry or punishing figure. The myth is not only asking why she responds so severely, it is asking whether human innocence is always enough when something sacred has already been exposed. If Artemis were only a goddess of distant severity, the story would be simpler. But she is also repeatedly associated with protection. She protects animals and young people. She is invoked at childbirth. She guards the vulnerable movement from one condition of life into another. In Callimachus's Hellenistic hymn to Artemis, she is imagined asking for the mountains, the bow, independence, and the role of coming to women in childbirth when they call for her aid. This is not a contradiction that ancient tradition needed to erase. It is the contradiction that gives Artemis her emotional power. The same boundary that shelters can also exclude. The same distance that protects freedom can wound anyone who refuses or fails to recognize it. A different myth makes this tension still harder. In Euripides' Hippolytus, a young man devoted to Artemis rejects another divine sphere so completely that his world collapses into misunderstanding and loss. At the end of the play, Artemis appears not as indifferent, but as deeply connected to him, unable to undo what has happened. That story is not the same as Actaeon's, and it should not be reduced to the same lesson. But placed beside it, the emotional pattern becomes clearer. Proximity to Artemis is not simple safety. To honor one protected world without understanding the larger limits of life can also become destructive. Her myths are not really stories about a goddess searching for reasons to punish. They are stories about people who approach something pure, private, or powerful, and discover too late that admiration is not the same as understanding. It would be too simple to claim that Artemis had one meaning for every Greek worshipper, in every city, across every century. The surviving sources do not allow that certainty. She could be huntress, protector of children, helper in childbirth, guardian of sanctuary, figure of transition, bearer of light, and later, in some traditions, closely connected with the moon. Her identity was not narrow. It grew through poetry, ritual, local worship, and later storytelling. But that range may be exactly why the boundary theme is so revealing. One possible interpretation is that Artemis represented a truth the ancient world could express through myth. Freedom is not the same as access. A forest remains wild because it cannot be entirely claimed. Childhood deserves protection because it is still becoming something new. Birth is sacred because it passes through uncertainty. Privacy matters because not everything beautiful exists for another person to possess. Even devotion has limits because no single ideal can erase the complexity of life. From that perspective, Artemis is not frightening because she despises humanity. She is formidable because she protects what humanity is tempted to cross too casually. The wilderness she guards is not lawless. It has a different kind of order, one not written on city walls but recognized at the edge of a grove, the threshold of a sanctuary, the beginning of adulthood, or the moment a hunter discovers that the world before him is not his to take. This is why the familiar image of Artemis is incomplete. Her bow is not only a symbol of the hunt, it is the visible sign of a boundary. Artemis was remembered in the mountains, among animals, beside children, near women facing childbirth, and within stories of mortals who came too close to what she protected. She was free, but never careless. She was protective, but never harmless. And perhaps that is why her myth endured. Because it understood that the most precious forms of freedom are often the ones guarded by distance, restraint, and respect. So when the Greeks imagined Artemis watching from the wild edge of the human world, what did they truly fear? The goddess who defended that boundary, or the human desire to believe that every beautiful, hidden, sacred thing exists to be entered and claimed?